What follows is my take on theology and the future of work, but through the lens of past texts. I want to warn you that I might be a little light on the future, but I hope to be heavy enough on the theology. I hear a lot of things about how the future of work is going to be different, but humans do not have substantially different bodies or minds from thousands of years ago. To underline my point, I will look at 5 ancient texts about work: the parable of the workers in the vineyard from Matthew's Gospel, an anecdote of Suetonius' biography of the Emperor Vespasian, one of Pliny the Younger's letters, a passage about a working animal in Apuleius' Metamorphoses, and a brief story from the sayings of the desert elders from 4th and 5th century AD. For my first text, in these texts, I find at least 5 ideas that might be useful for the future of work. First, do not exceed a full day, even if you cannot match an ancient dawn to dusk schedule. Second, use a helpful metaphor for work, something that emphasizes variety rather than repetition. Third, think about what creates or destroys paying work for others, especially in light of automation or labor-saving devices. Fourth, do not be overly focused on what you think you deserve for your work, whether money or spiritual benefit. Fifth and finally, do not over-identify your work or think of yourself as your job. For my first text, I want to read a semi-familiar passage from the Gospel of Matthew, the parable of the vineyard. Jesus said, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' And so they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, 'Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?' 'Because no one has hired us,' they answered. He said to them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first.' The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. 'These who were hired last worked only 1 hour,' they said, 'and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day.' But he answered one of them, 'I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." There ends the parable. I have quoted the whole thing because in one place we find themes that we will see again. First, note that the parable is framed by morning and evening, and that daylight hours are time for work. This truth is more prominent for ancient agriculture, since typically agricultural work was not done by lamplight, even though there were a few ancient occupations that were done at night, often to prepare for the day. At the risk of offending those with a late adolescent sleep cycle, let me say in my personal experience that the day is more productive for most people. When I push work into the later evening, I disrupt my sleep cycle and cannot rise to meet the next day. Second, there is no intrinsic relationship between labor and wage. The wage here is based on the task, not the hours, and it is set by a rather arbitrary agreement between employer and employee. I know that this sounds a bit libertarian, but let me point to the grumbling of the earlier workers. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." The employer has an idea of a fair wage. "I will pay you whatever is right," but the employees do not agree. Maybe there is an ideal of a fair wage, but it's not often put into practice. In other words, the parable agrees with our observation that the relationship between labor and wage is often arbitrary, at least in this world. Okay? But this parable also suggests that your true value does not depend on your hourly rate, nor on the job you happen to be hired to do. Okay? The laborers in the marketplace could have been hired for a wide variety of tasks. I could bring up how much Jeff Bezos makes every second versus one of his warehouse workers, but that is well known. Third, look at how much slack there is in the labor system. Note that people are hanging out in the marketplace still looking for work at 5 in the afternoon. And they will especially appreciate the wage of a denarius, the average skilled wage for a day, to cover the time they spent working plus the time they spent waiting for work. Unemployment was a huge problem in the ancient world, since especially at Rome, unemployment tended to produce political unrest, okay, or people hiring themselves out as political thugs for one faction or another. This brings us to our next passage from Suetonius' Life of the Emperor Vespasian. The Emperor Vespasian ruled, let's say, 69 to 79 AD. Suetonius often has a tenuous relationship with the truth and is more interested in his subjects' sex lives than in their economic policies. But in a section featuring a grab bag of sayings of the Emperor Vespasian, Suetonius relates that Vespasian was concerned about the level of employment on his projects in the city of Rome. And when a craftsman was promising that he would bring the large marble columns onto the Capitoline Hill at small expense, the emperor refused the reward in exchange for a comment that was above average. He sent back the device after declaring that he would allow the lower class to feed themselves. End quote. We know that the columns were brought up to restore the building on the Capitoline Hill, known as the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, one of Rome's oldest and biggest temples. Vespasian started or finished several building projects, such as the Temple of Peace in Rome, and even in other cities, like Brixia in northern Italy. In other words, Vespasian's public works projects were not simply for the beautification of his empire and propaganda for himself, and to prevent being deposed by angry mobs, but to provide jobs for impoverished Romans, specifically the bottom of the economic pyramid, even if that meant jobs like schlepping a column up a hill. The Latin word I translate here as lower class, plebicula, literally means little people. Those of a certain age may remember Leona Helmsley, the hotel magnate and the queen of mean. She commented to one of her staff, "Only the little people pay taxes." But Vespasian knew that he needed to keep the little people working in order to tax them to fund his empire. With this quote, I am not advocating shutting down all the machines to get to full employment like the Luddites. Rather, I recommend not automating a job like truck driving out of existence before we figure out what the little people, such as 3 million truck drivers, could do for a living instead. I will now move from the little people to the other end of the income spectrum. Here is Pliny the Younger on his work as an author. He has found a good way to frame a work activity, writing, in terms of a leisure activity, hunting. Or at least hunting is leisure in an agricultural society for those who own farms. These farms might be better called plantations, worked by enslaved and hired laborers, and their labor made Pliny's leisure possible. Pliny writes to his friend Cornelius Tacitus, "You will laugh, and you may laugh. I, that guy you know, captured 3 really beautiful wild boars. All by yourself, you say? By myself, but still not so that I completely left my sluggishness and rest. I was sitting near the hunting nets. Nearby was no hunting spear nor light spear, but a pen and writing tablets. I was thinking about something and writing it down so that I might bring back empty hands, but full writing tablets. It is not the case that you scorn this type of studying. It is amazing how my mind is roused by the shaking and moving of my body. Now, wherever in the woods there are both solitude and silence itself that is provided for hunting, they are great inducements for thought. Therefore, when you hunt, it will be allowed, by my idea, for you to bring writing tablets, just like a picnic basket and a drinking flask. You will prove that Diana, goddess of the hunt, does not wander in the mountains more than Minerva, goddess of crafts. Farewell." End quote. 4 things stand out here. First, this is a work metaphor, bagging literary productions, such as this letter itself, like big game. This metaphor is so fully developed that we are unsure whether Pliny actually went out to the woods to hunt or not, whether the hunting nets are ready in Latin are literal or metaphorical. Second, the work is delimited. There's a time to work and a time not to work, and when the tablets are full, work is over. Third, elite creative work can be seen as a game, or in modern terms, gamified. Fourth, we are not brains in vats or on sticks, but people with bodies that need to shake and move in order for our brains to think. In a famous ancient novel, The Metamorphoses or the Golden Ass, the hero Lucius turns into a donkey because of a misapplied magic potion, a scene that inspired Pinocchio, both novel and movie. He has several adventures as a donkey, and he endures mistreatment that would be unthinkable for a Roman male citizen whose body could not be touched except in punishment or in battle, but all too common for an animal or for an enslaved person. Even though he saves a young princess from bandits by galloping away with her on his back, he is soon again put to work powering a grain mill by walking in a circle to grind one millstone against another. He writes, quote, "You see, the miller's wife, that truly greedy and most wicked woman, immediately gave me over to powering the mill while continually whipping me with a leafy branch. Anyhow, no allotted grain rations were offered to wretched me in exchange for such great labors, for she kept selling to neighboring farms my barley ration that was supposed to be the harvest from my escapes, but allotting to me, obligated to power the mill with my work throughout the day till mid-evening, only chaff caked together and dirty and gritty from the large grindstone." End quote. Ancient mills were powered by running water or by animals or humans walking in circles. They featured lots of whipping and repetition and exploitation. In particular, Lucius notes that the food given to him as a reward for rescuing the princess, the harvest from my escapes, is ground up and sold to others. The phrase "to me, obligated to power the mill with my work throughout the day until mid-evening," sounds a particular note of despair. Since the narrator Lucius still thinks like a human, even though he has the body of a donkey, he can think about his donkey-like suffering in human terms. And readers can draw analogies to the suffering of enslaved people of that time and throughout human history. Moreover, the truism that you are not your job applies especially to tasks you are forced to do, as well as we see that this is an example of not respecting the day and its limitations. With the next passage, we move back to Christianity, where we began, and the sayings of the elders of the 4th and 5th centuries AD. This is a collection of sayings of monks who fled to the desert from the cities of the late Roman Empire in order to grow closer to God. In this passage, the worker is not a vineyard worker trying to earn a denarius, but a monk attacked with erotic dreams about his long-dead wife. The story goes, they used to say about one of the fathers that he was from the world, and he was being attacked with erotic dreams on account of his wife. Therefore, he kept telling this to the elders, and since they knew that he was a worker and doing more duties than the ones they were telling him to, they began to impose on him rules, so as for his body to grow weak and not to be able to revolt any longer. End quote. An elder comes from another monastery and discovers the sad result of this discipline. The monk's body grows weak from overwork, but his troubling dreams actually increase. The visiting elder advises him, "While eating your small meal, cast your care on the Lord, for you cannot prevail over this trouble by your own efforts. And you see, our body is like a coat. If you care for it, it stands up, but if you neglect it, it rots." End quote. The story concludes, the suffering monk followed the advice and was cured. Two things stand out. First, in a monastic context, as in the world, there is a temptation to overwork, to go beyond a full day, which should be avoided. The body is indeed like a coat and needs to be treated with care so that God can work upon us and through us. In this moment, we particularly need our body's immune response at full strength to keep us alive to help others. Second, work does not cure mental or spiritual problems, especially when it is overwork and begins to destroy the body. Since we are not our jobs, throwing ourselves into work does not restore our true selves. Instead, the psalmist's advice to use prayer is more effective, to cast on the Lord our anxieties, that we may return to our true selves without that burden. In closing, I want to recap my main points. First, do not exceed a full day, even if your work times do not match up to the ancient agricultural timetable or the 20th century 9 to 5. Second, use a helpful metaphor for work, perhaps a hunt or a game, rather than walking in a circle around millstones day after day. Third, think about how your choices create or destroy paying work for others. Fourth, do not be overly focused on what you think you deserve for your work. And finally, do not over-identify with your work. That last point is one I especially need to hear, since I think of my work as a calling rather than a task. Yet to God, it is no more special than picking up recycling from the student union. And here I want to read a brief prayer associated with the Saint Anselm of Aosta. And it goes, "Come now, insignificant person, free for a while your usual occupations. Hide yourself for a time from disturbing thoughts. Cast aside for now burdensome cares. Free yourself a little for God and for whatever may help you in your search for God. Close the door and seek God. Speak now, my whole heart. Speak to God. I seek your face, O Lord, your face, I seek.